Hello, everyone. Welcome to Membership 101, the fifth and final week. You've made it. Very exciting. I'm Rodney Gibbs with Revenue Lab at the Texas Tribune, here as always with Ariel Zarolnik from the Membership Puzzle Project. And while you can't see him, Yossi from LinFest is here as well. He's having a little trouble with his camera, but he is definitely here in the chat. There he is in the chat. So all three of us are back. This is, as I said, the final week. You've made it to the home stretch. And I think Ariel is putting lots of pieces together today, so lots to cover. And then stick around to the end. We have a few follow-up things for you about stuff to expect next and what's coming next year for more membership training from us. So Ariel, would you like to take it away?
Yeah. Thanks, Rodney. So as Rodney mentioned today, we'll start with a little bit of a sort of wrap up of what we've been going over the past 4 weeks. And then I'll go into sort of what it takes to get operationally ready for membership. These questions that are on the screen right now, if you want to ruminate on them a little bit over the next few minutes and drop them in the chat, that's great. Thank you to everybody who has started doing that. I think we will get going from here. Yossi is running my slides for me again. So yes, as I mentioned, we'll be talking today about how to get operationally ready for membership in your news organization. The first, though, I wanted to do a little bit of a recap and sort of help tie all the pieces together about what we've been doing up to this point. So we started the course with assessing your readiness for membership. We went through the sort of 9 questions to ask yourself before you head down the membership path. And then we talked about how to conduct audience research in the interest of designing a membership effort and the importance of figuring out how to identify your value proposition and tell your story. That was the week that we had Jay Allred join us. And after that, we talked about how you can develop memberful routines and set objectives for your membership program so that you can have a stronger idea of what success will look like for you. And then last week, we talked about designing your membership program, and Sarah Glenn from the Texas Tribune joined us to sort of pull the hood up or help us look under the hood of how the Texas Tribune designed its membership program and how they've made changes over time as they've learned who their members are. And today we will be talking about how to get operationally ready for membership. If we can head to the next slide. We will be talking about some of the common membership staffing challenges and how at MPP we've seen newsrooms solve for them. Then I'll go very briefly through the cost to account for when building your budget and sort of a high level look at setting up your tech stack. So that will look at some of the core components of a tech stack, what to look for in your tools, and how to make the decision between buying something off the shelf and building your own thing. So before we get into those things, though, what I wanted to talk a little bit about are some of the learnings that have come out of the office hours. We've had some really great chats in the office hours in the last few weeks, and it showed me that there are a few things that we could benefit from clarifying with everybody who's in the course. The first comes from a great conversation that I had with the Christian Science Monitor, who has some very well-defined audience segments or personas. And what they wanted to know is, how does the value proposition intersect with each of our audience personas? And it made me realize that we should specify your value proposition exists for the organization as a whole. How you deliver on that is going to look differently potentially for each of your audience segments, but your value proposition doesn't change from person to person. And that's because your value proposition is about what you do exceptionally well. This is another thing that came up in one of the office hours. We helped a few organizations workshop their value proposition statements and their membership value proposition statements. And one of the things I realized that we could maybe be a little bit clear about is that your value proposition doesn't have to encapsulate everything that your organization does. And it's not a summary of your work. What it does is it emphasizes the things that you do exceptionally well that set you apart from other people. And it draws a link between what your audience needs and what you make. So that sort of, a lot of organizations were struggling to figure out how this one sentence could capture everything that they do. And the answer is that it won't. It will cover the things that you do better than anybody else and why they would want to support your work. Another important thing that we answered some questions around in the office hours is how the value proposition ends up being used. An important thing to understand is if you're using that strategizer template, you're never going to publish that statement publicly. It's a very sort of stiff strategy statement, but it is a very good jumping off point for everything that you do that is seen externally. The way that you talk about your program, the membership appeals that you write, but this is a question that we got there is, do I share my value proposition statement with my readers? Probably not in that sort of structure that we've been using in our workshops of the strategizer template. And the last thing is we answered a few questions around what membership objectives are for. When do you use them in the process? Your membership objectives are valuable. Defining your membership objectives is valuable because it will help you measure whether you are achieving success with your membership program. So this sort of sets out benchmarks that you're hoping your organization can get to in a specified period of time. And if you don't get to that benchmark, it invites a conversation internally about what you can do differently to help get to that level or to make sure that you hit that target the next time around. So I hope that sort of helps to clarify some of the questions. We heard these questions in office hours, which made me realize that many of you might have similar questions. And so wanted to rehash that a little bit before we jumped in to the rest of the course. And the next thing is, to the point about the membership objectives, Rodney suggested we actually share some examples of what membership objectives might look like, which might help sort of answer some of the questions that we got around that. So on the screen, you see examples. These are not from any real life newsrooms. These are ones that me and the research team sort of came up with as examples of what membership objectives might be. But on the screen, you see here a mix of sort of revenue-related membership objectives and engagement-related membership objectives. So those first two are related explicitly to the conversion and retention of paying members. And the second two objectives that you see on the screen are ways that news organizations might set goals for audience engagement or memberful routines in the sort of MPP parlance. So I hope that sharing a few examples of these objectives might make that process a little bit easier for those organizations who are trying to figure this out. And we are going to have more time than usual for questions today because this is the wrap-up session. So if you have questions about any of these sort of things that we've covered in previous classes, please feel free to use the Ask a Question button at the bottom right of the screen like we have previously. And we've sort of designed today's session to have more time to get through the questions since it's the last class. The last thing I wanted to sort of recap before we jumped in any further is last week's session. We got a little tight on time and we rushed through a little bit more than I would have liked. So I just wanted to sort of recap the steps for designing a membership program. I'm seeing a lot of chatter in the chat box maybe about this and benefits. But the steps are pretty straightforward. It's figuring out first what your loyal audience members value about you. And that comes through audience research, which we talked about in session 2. And then after that, you use that information to identify your membership value proposition. And then that value proposition will become the sort of starting point for identifying benefits that align with your mission and align with the value proposition. And then we encourage you at MPP to think about it as a sort of MVP. So you don't have to get it all right off the bat. You don't have to roll out a full-fledged membership program at first glance. You might think about it as, what are the 1 to 2 things that we can offer from the beginning and deliver very well on to test out enthusiasm for ideas and sort of iterate from there. And we encourage organizations to prioritize what we call sort of the high value, low effort benefits. So those benefits will be very valuable to your members, but won't require significant effort on your organization's part in order to fulfill. And in the membership guide and in the links that were sent out on Monday, we shared a sort of step-by-step process. We're going through these like 4 big points that I just went through. And the last bit, especially since we are sharing benefits in the chat, is the steps to choosing benefits. First, most importantly, the 2 questions that we encourage organizations to ask. So as I mentioned, you're going to return to your value proposition statement to identify what benefits align with your audience interests. And then I encourage you, for every benefit that you're thinking about offering, to ask these 2 questions. Who is this for and why would they want it? So addressing the sort of desirability element of the human-centered design framework that we've talked about so much. And then what is it going to cost you in staff time and actual cost to offer that benefit? And that's where you begin to assess that sort of effort measurement within the impact effort matrix. Is like, if this is going to take 7 to 10 hours of staff time on any given week to fulfill, it better be a very valuable benefit for your members. And you should know that based on audience research. There are a lot of ways that you can potentially decrease the amount of work that goes into providing that benefit. And if you see it scoring really high on the effort matrix, you're going to want to think about ways that you can make it simpler to deliver. So the last thing is going back to that question that we had in the chat in the beginning of sharing your work around maybe what benefits you're thinking about. And we've got our first question break. So I see that there is one already in here from Miriam. We're figuring out what to give our members over a period of a year, and now we are identifying benefits. I'm wondering, when does it get old? How often should you revamp or give new benefits if things feel drag, or if it isn't broke, carry on? That's a great question. We talked a little bit about this last week. The first step is sort of figuring out how will you know if that benefit is working. So say you have a member-only newsletter. The easiest way to figure out if it's still working is by keeping a close eye on the open rates on that newsletter, or if you're doing member-only events, keeping an eye on sort of the attendance rate for those member-only events and seeing if that continues to grow, or if it stagnates, or if it even starts to decline. So the first thing is, can we figure out whether this is working based on data, and where would we find that data? And if you can't answer it with data, thinking about maybe surveying your members. So one of the easiest way to do this, and this is an idea that is stolen from Steady, a membership platform based in Germany, is they encourage organizations at regular intervals, maybe at least once a year, to survey their members and ask them one very simple question: which benefit do you value most, and which benefit do you value least? And they say that that's a lot more effective than asking members to rank all the benefits, because they often don't have that sophisticated idea of what they like and don't like. But if you ask them very simply, what do you like most and what do you like least, that will give you an internal ranking of how much the benefits are desired. So that's sort of two questions. You might look at data to begin identifying areas where enthusiasm might be flagging, and then you can follow that up with a survey or a focus group to sort of figure out how you can improve upon that. Next question is from Sarah. She asked, how does a newsroom avoid conflict of interest or the appearance of one when it comes to offering discounts and complimentary tickets to events, businesses, et cetera, as a benefit for members? Has that been a problem with other membership programs? If so, how did others navigate it? That's a great question. I don't think this is specific to membership. News organizations also face skepticism when they host roundtables and invite community members to participate in those roundtables. They face this when they invite people to contribute op-eds. There isn't necessarily an easy answer other than total transparency. If there is any sort of financial exchange as a result of those, and actually maybe the Texas Tribune has navigated this. I see Rodney just turned his video on and maybe wants to answer this question for their specifics. But a thing that I will say is the importance of transparency there, and trying to anticipate any of the skepticism or concern that might come up externally, and proactively address that with an FAQ or an explanation of what it means for someone to be a partner, what it means for them to offer benefits to your members. And Rodney, anything specific with the Tribune to mention there?
You nailed it. I mean, we do all sorts of partnerships, not so much benefits necessarily to membership, although we've done things like, I think Sarah mentioned last week, lotteries and drawings. If you become a member this month, you'll be entered in a drawing for this hotel stay, that kind of thing. And you're right, just being transparent about it, that this hotel is a partner. We disclose on our donation page that they gave an in-kind donation valued at $500 or whatever it was. I think when you get in trouble is when you're trying to be clever about it or just not transparent. And so particularly, I mean, I'm sure it works for all sorts of groups, but nonprofits in particular, it's helpful just to put all those cards on the table. That's the best defense against any problems around that.
Yeah. I think a key thing is to make it really easy for them to find the information explaining this. They shouldn't have to hunt down the explanation of what it means to be an advertiser versus a partner versus a sponsor. You want to make it really easy for them to find that information, because when they can't find the information, people's minds will often jump to the most nefarious outcome, and rather than, oh, their site is a little bit hard to navigate and I just didn't get quite to the right place very quickly. So just this is an area where it might help to even invite some members to help you think through this. Maybe there's a focus group with members, or asking someone even to just navigate your site with you watching and see how hard it is for them to find the about page or find information around the different financial relationships that you might have. Any other questions at this stage? I'm trying to sort of read through the chat and see if anything else has come up here. I love Shay's answers around in-person pitch nights. where newsrooms get to talk about their story ideas. I really like the framing of pitch, which to me sounds like it's short and fun and there's brevity rather than like the slog of an editorial meeting that maybe we as journalists enjoy sitting through, but might be really boring for the average member of the public to sit through. So the pitch night sort of makes me think this is going to be something a lot livelier and quicker and move around. Great. Well, if there aren't any more questions, then we'll move on to the staffing questions for this. And we'll have 2 or 3 more question breaks throughout today. So make sure to drop those in the chat as they come up. So staffing your membership strategy is something that we have heard tons of questions about at Membership Puzzle Project. It's one of the things that comes up the most often. And in the membership guide, we dug into this challenge quite a bit. But as we interviewed something like 50 organizations for the membership guide, we heard the same sort of 5 most common staffing challenges come up again and again. And so I'm going to spend some time today going through those challenges and how we've seen organizations begin to solve them. And one of the most challenging things about staffing a membership strategy is that there's incredible variation in membership connected job titles, where they sit within the organization. Somebody I remember last week asked a question about, but Chalkbeat's membership editor sits on the revenue side, and the Richland Source, the membership editor, sits within the newsroom. So how do we parse that? The answer is there isn't a right way to do it, and that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to give really specific staffing advice to newsrooms, is that setup looks different for everybody else. But one of the things that we have seen at MPP is that membership succeeds when it is touching every part of the newsroom, particularly if it's a very a membership program that is very built on audience engagement. And so even if that person sits on the revenue side, they're very likely going to have to be in very regular communication with the engagement editor, the social media editor, maybe the editor-in-chief. And that's why staffing membership can be such a stumbling block for so many newsrooms, is the amount of coordination that has to happen across the different silos within the organization. And so hopefully what we'll do today is offer you a few frameworks for thinking through the challenges that we've seen come up the most often. The first is not knowing what skills to prioritize. And this is, MPP encourages news organizations to take a skills first approach to hiring rather than a roles based approach to hiring. And Yossi, if we could move forward a slide. Many organizations come to us and say, I need to hire somebody for membership. What should their job be? And we encourage organizations to instead do a sort of audit of what skills do you feel like you're missing in order to succeed at your membership goals. And that's going to look different for different types of membership programs. So if your membership program is based on a really strong in-person event strategy, after the pandemic, you might need to hire somebody with a lot of events expertise. If you're a national organization that is never going to convene people in person, events are a much less important part of your portfolio, or maybe you need to bring somebody in with online events expertise and you need to think less about venues and less about sort of icebreakers and things like that. If your program is numbering 10,000 people or more at this point in time, you're likely going to be looking for a marketing and retention specialist who can help you overcome growth challenges and ensure that you keep the members that you have. So I mention that because what skills are most important for your newsroom are going to vary a lot based on what your newsroom is pursuing with your membership program. And in interest of helping organizations think through that, one of the things that we include in the membership guide is a skills checklist for member-driven newsrooms. And that skills checklist is divided into must-have, nice-to-have, and sort of fill this in later if you have the money and time skills. And we will have a link to that skills checklist in the email that goes out on Monday. You're welcome to find it in the staffing section of the guide in advance. But when you're thinking about hiring for this role, we encourage you to sit down with the skills checklist and design the role around the skills that you're missing, rather than try and copy and paste an opening from another organization whose membership program might look really different from yours under the hood. And one of the case studies that we did in the membership guide about the Daily Maverick sort of helps illustrate how one organization thought through that challenge. So the Daily Maverick, when they launched their membership program, they had 2 people and they were working on it part-time. Today, they have 7 people working on membership almost completely full-time. But the reason that we shared this case study is because we thought it was really interesting the way that they took a very skills-focused approach to building up their membership team. Yossi, if we can move to the next slide. So when they started, the most important component of their membership program was getting buy-in across the organization and making sure the tech for running it worked. So in the beginning, they had their publisher and the head of product working on this, in addition to all the other things that people with those jobs are going to do. But within 2 months of launching the membership program, they realized that they needed to invest really heavily in a community engagement strategy because they ended up having a really successful launch and members wanted desperately to be more involved and they had nobody to manage that involvement. So their very first hire was a community manager. And then as their membership program continued to grow at a really strong clip, they realized that they had tremendous customer service needs, particularly because of payment processing challenges they have with payment platforms that are available in South Africa. They were churning a ton of members, not because members actually wanted to leave, but because it was really hard to keep credit cards current. And they had a lot of older readers who were struggling to sort of navigate the registration process and access their benefits and things like that. So the second hire that they made was somebody for customer service. And it began as sort of part-time inbox support. And that is now a full-time role focused on membership retention, yes, on the technical aspects, but also on sort of understanding what will keep people in the program and conducting audience research in service of that. And the next thing that they did was support their event strategy. So the Daily Maverick has grown its membership program very significantly through events, previously in-person events, and have continued to grow very significantly through online events since the pandemic. And so the next hire they made, because the community manager could not handle the amount of work that was going into their events and also realized that they needed to level up in terms of what they could provide, they hired a full-time event strategist. And since then, they've added to that team. And I bring up this journey because I think it really articulates having a very structured approach to filling the skills gap that you need at any point in time. And this might look different for many organizations who might not encounter the same credit card challenges that the Daily Maverick has. They might not need a full-time retention manager as early on in the journey as the Daily Maverick did. And we'll have a link to that case study in the links that go out on Monday, but also we can likely drop it in the chat during this if you want to dig into that a little bit further. And the other thing that I'll mention before we move on to the next challenge is that we also in the membership guide staffing section have a folder of membership related job descriptions. So organizations have very frequently sent us their job descriptions for membership openings, asking us if we have anybody in mind who would be great for that opening. And we have in turn maybe suggested people, but also ask them if we can copy their job description and add it to this folder. So you'll find in the staffing section something like 25 different membership related job descriptions from news organizations around the world of different sizes, of different sort of levels of sophistication in their membership journey. So if you're looking to hire and you need some inspiration for what those jobs might look like, you can head to that folder. And the next challenge is often the fact that people desperately need to support their membership program more strongly, but are not actually able to hire anybody. This is something that comes up a lot, particularly with smaller news organizations, but I hopefully in delivering some very welcome news, and that you do not need to automatically hire a new person when you launch a membership program. If you can't hire somebody, as I mentioned in the previous, you'll first look at where the critical membership skills exist across the organization and find the people who have those skills. So many organizations we've worked with have discovered when they do this sort of skills audit that they actually have all the skills that they need contained within the organization. It's just that they're not contained within one person. And so they end up bringing those people together on a regular basis to create a sort of membership team rather than having a membership specific position. And I think the takeaway there is you might need new meetings, not new people. And that can be a really reassuring thing to hear if you don't have the money in your budget before launching the membership program to actually dedicate an entire staff person to that job. And we have a case study in the membership guide on how Chalkbeat actually pursued this. So they built what they call the Odd Squad, short for Audience Squad. And it was exactly for this reason, is until they reached certain membership benchmarks, they were not going to be able to invest the money into hiring somebody to work on membership full time. So they instead brought together all the different people who might have to touch the membership program in order to ensure its success. And what I find really interesting about this is that a year and a half into the membership program, they still don't have a dedicated membership person because they have found that bringing the Audience Squad together has covered all of the membership needs that they have at this point in time. And so here you can see who they have in the meeting. It's the editor-in-chief, the chief strategy officer, Allison Go, who you met last week, their engagement editor, their senior marketing manager, Carrie, and their director of earned revenue. And on the next slide, you see Carrie shared this with us because she presented at O&A alongside Membership Puzzle Project, sort of how they've structured the Odd Squad. So the Odd Squad is, broadly speaking, responsible for every part of Chalkbeat's audience funnel. And so membership is only one component of that. What I really like about this is they looked at each stage of the audience funnel Their audience funnel probably looks a little bit different from many of you here because they have a sort of different revenue structure than most organizations. But they point out here very, very clearly who is responsible for each stage of this membership funnel. And that makes the case for why they need to be in that meeting and what role they're going to play in that meeting. And in the membership guide and the resources we'll go on Monday, we'll link to the case study that goes a lot deeper into how the audience squad is organized, and even some suggestions from Chalkbeat on how to figure out who needs to be in your own sort of like cross-functional team meeting. And I'd be curious if people wanted to share in the chat, if you have your own sort of like membership meetings or your own sort of audience squad meetings, I'd be really curious to hear how that's organized and who might be in those meetings. So if anybody here has set up something similar about meetings to coordinate instead of hiring a new person, I'd love to hear who you feel needs to be in those meetings to accomplish your membership and audience engagement goals. Another challenge with the fact that membership is sort of this cross-functional strategy that requires involvement from the editorial side, the revenue side, the product side, and the community side is that it can be really hard to figure out who is actually responsible for execution. So we say membership is everyone's responsibility. I think all of us broadly agree with that, and that somebody cannot succeed at membership if they're working on it completely alone. But if you have like 5 people responsible for parts of your membership puzzle, it's going to be really hard to keep track of who is actually getting the work done. So it's incredibly important whenever you undertake a sort of change within your membership program or identify a goal within your membership program to also very clearly identify who has what level of responsibility for making sure that that happens. And the way that we at MPP have encountered most organizations approaching this and are really big fans of is by using what is called the RACI model. So the first thing you do is specify the decision or the change or the problem at hand very clearly, as get as specific as you can. And then you're going to break that decision down into all the different tasks that have to happen in order to address that problem, make that decision, or implement that change. And then you're going to identify all the different people who could be involved in that, and then specify what their participation should be. And from there, you are going to identify who should be responsible, which is the largest sort of part of the puzzle, who is accountable, who should be aware of what is happening, who needs to provide support to the people responsible for executing, and who needs to be informed. So sorry, I said something a little bit wrong there. If they're consulted, they need to be consulted before you make any final decisions. If they are considered to be informed, then they just need to know what you're working on and be aware that that is happening. And I'm really glad that Miriam is asking that question about sort of responsibility priority, because we'll get into that next. But before we go into that, I know the RACI model can be a little bit hard to sort of digest, especially in the abstract, just hearing about it out loud. And so Sarah Glenn was very, very helpful for us when we were writing the membership guide. And she showed very concretely how they use the RACI model to make a decision for the membership program. The targeted change at hand was that they realized they needed to simplify the membership tiers for the Texas Tribune. And so she shows here on the screen, and you'd find this in the membership guide as well if you want to dig in more. On the y-axis, you see 5 of the sort of very specific tasks associated with achieving this goal of simplifying the membership tiers. And across the x-axis, you see the different people who will be involved in that. LP stands for Loyalty Program Manager. That's Sarah Glenn. You see also there the sales administrator, the engineer, the CEO, and the, I think, audience officer or audience editor. And you can see how they broke down who is responsible, accountable, consulted, supported, and informed throughout this change that they needed to implement on the program. And this can be incredibly useful, even if you're a 3-person team. And so you're not going to necessarily fill in an R, an A, a C, an S, and an I for every one of these decisions. This can be really helpful even for small teams. And you might begin to realize who is sort of being responsible the most often and can shift sort of allocations of responsibilities and resources to serve for that. And the next question, or the next sort of challenge that we've seen come up the most often, is disagreements about prioritization. So your membership concerned staff will sometimes struggle to make it a priority for the newsroom to prioritize members in the decision making. There's also going to be the priorities of reporters, advertisers, engineers, sales executives. All of these other people are going to have their own sort of priorities, even if the end goal is greater sustainability and impact for the organization. And so this is something that Deck Correspondent had to work through for quite a while. And one of our researchers on the membership guide had worked at Deck Correspondent for quite a long time. And she taught us about the responsibility authority gap and how they solve for that debt correspondent. So the responsibility authority gap comes up when the person who is responsible for membership has too much responsibility, but not enough authority to meet the goals directly. Maybe they're not high up enough in the organizational hierarchy. Maybe they don't have any ability to influence how money in the budget is spent. Whatever it is, they don't have enough authority to actually execute on the thing that they are responsible for doing. And it comes up when they have to work through other priorities and the resources of other teams in order to get their own work done. This is the sort of crux of the responsibility authority gap, is they can't do anything on their own, even if they know how to do it. They have to work through other teams and other people in order to accomplish that. And so a debt correspondent, the way that they handled that is they sat down, next slide, Yossi. They sat down and identified these 5 questions as a team that they would ask every time they were trying to make a case for prioritizing members' needs over other needs within the organization. So this might come up when somebody suggested a new feature request. This might come up when they were thinking about, okay, we have enough money in the budget to hire a new person, and we have to figure out if this person is going to fill in on the sort of reporting and editing side or the community management side. These questions were sort of designed in such a way that they could speak to a number of the situations that come up. Your questions might look a little bit different than that, but the important thing is that you work with all the stakeholders to come up with this list of questions, and that you use the same questions over and over again. You don't change these based on the circumstances, because the value in these is that everybody has agreed that these are the right questions to ask and that they apply sort of across the board for your decisions. So you see, who is this for? That's identifying, similar to the benefits questions that I asked earlier. Who are you doing this thing for? What data or insights do you have that point to the fact that members actually want this? This is a need for the membership effort in the organization. How does this serve members? So get really explicit about how this is meeting a need that your members have expressed to you. Who can make this happen and who will be responsible for implementing it? And how does this further the membership story that we're trying to tell? So these are the 5 questions that anybody, a debt correspondent on the membership team, was encouraged to sort of answer to make the case that maybe the engineers should be dedicated to implementing this new feature to serve members, maybe that reporters should be spending more of their time working with members. Whatever the sort of situation that arose, they asked these 5 questions to address that sort of responsibility authority gap that I think Mariam mentioned in the chat. And I'd be curious if this feels like something, based on your experience, Mariam, that could solve for some of the challenges that you're having at your organization around this. The last challenge that comes up the most often, and I'm sure this is one that many of you can relate to, is the challenge of having a very tiny team. If you are a one-person newsroom or you're the only person working on membership of your organization, we want to emphasize that we understand that you probably can't do everything that we have spoken about in the course of this course, in the course of the membership guide. Sometimes these are the suggestions that we are making are designed for slightly larger teams. But based on our discussions with newsrooms of all sizes, we have a few suggestions for how you can manage membership in small and one-person newsrooms. The first is to prioritize the critical skills. So if you can't hire anybody, you focus on only the skills that are sort of on the must-have list for your organization. Those are going to usually be skills around community management, metrics measurement, and basic marketing strategies. Those are the things that we hear come up the most often for those like 1 to 3 person organizations, the things that they can't super effectively outsource. The next is to lean on software and outsourcing to streamline your processes. So there are a lot of companies and software and types of software that are out there at this point that can address some of the things that you might be doing very manually. And those costs can seem quite steep initially until you actually think about the cost of the time that you're spending on these things that should be spent on things that only you can do. A great example is the importance of maybe investing in automating your customer service. So some organizations, particularly Colorado Sun, we've seen use Zendesk to address a lot of their customer service issues. Zendesk comes with a number of fees, but when they sat back and looked at how much of their CTO's time was being spent on answering the same questions over and over again, they decided it was worth the investment to build out a Zendesk sort of help people help themselves FAQ on the Colorado Sun's membership program. So think about not just the cost of the software, but also how that cost compares to the value of your time that you're spending potentially on quite menial task. Another thing is to be honest about what you can do and what you can't do. If you're surveying your audience members regularly, you're very often going to hear things that you just can't act on in your current capacity, and that's okay. Be honest about what you can reasonably do. And if you can't do everything members ask you to do, explain why. There are always going to be things that you cannot act on that come from your members. And this is maybe when a sort of impact effort matrix comes in handy. You might need to put some of the requests from members against that to figure out if it's something that you can even act on or if it's worth diverting resources to act on. But a really sort of relentless prioritization process and honesty about what you can't do can go a really long way towards helping tiny organizations staff their membership program. And the last thing is keep it simple. For example, having multiple membership tiers can seem like a really nice idea. It can seem like a very good way to serve the different sort of depths of relationship that people want to have with your organization. And that is true. But multiple membership tiers are also a lot more work to manage. One of the organizations that we worked with at MPP, WTF just happened today, used to have several membership tiers, and a while back they simplified that and simplified the benefits that they provided because it was a one-person team, and he was providing those benefits was beginning to take away the time that he needed to instead be spending on producing the journalism that prompted people to support him in the first place. So if you're struggling to sort of keep up with what you have put out in the world and what you have promised to offer, you might sit back and look at how can I simplify this process? How can I reduce the variety of things that I'm trying to offer to my members? And the membership guide has a few other bits of staffing advice that I'm not going to get into today, but wanted to flag for you if these are questions that you have, that you will find answers to them in the membership guide. We have, as I mentioned before, a folder of membership job descriptions. The link to that will go out on Monday. We have a sort of breakdown of all the ongoing tasks that have to happen to support memberships, the kind of things that have to happen on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. We also flag some of the things that your organization will have to do, maybe like 2 or 4 times a year in order to support your membership program. And we broke these down so you could sort of plan for resource allocation and time allocation to support your membership program. The other is how you could potentially bring in your members to help staff your membership program. So there are opportunities for you to enlist members in hosting member-only chats, or finding venues for your events. There are a number of ways that you can have your members help support the membership program without being extractive about it. And we have some advice on sort of how to solicit that support from your members in the staffing section. And we also talked about when you encounter a crisis like the pandemic, how you can assess what parts of the membership program to sort of put on the shelf and not work on for a while, because you need to move your membership staff maybe to focus on more urgent, immediate needs like editorial production and things like that. And so we offered some questions and examples of newsrooms who sort of made that calculation of, we're going to stop doing this thing for our members for a little while because we simply can't in this crisis moment. I think that brings us to another question break. Let me see, I think we've got a few in there.
I moved one from the chat, Miriam, so I don't know if you address that fully or you want to dig in anymore. That's the first one.
It seems to take a toll on the Odd Squad team if they're responsible for a lot of other stuff, and the work is done, but it's not consistent, which brings up the really ugly question: what is their job and responsibility priority? Miriam, let us know in the chat if that sort of responsibility authority gap slide ended up answering it. Let's see. I'm seeing a few comments from here, so I'm just trying to catch up with it. Difficult for people who are already very busy or set in their jobs to add something else to their plate. We do Saturday meetings that are a few hours long. We also have reassigned roles as someone just really can't get their head around their additional responsibilities without judgment, and that also helps. I mean, that's great. I'm a little concerned for your team that you're having multi-hour meetings on Saturdays. That sounds really grueling. I hope you guys have a vacation coming up. But I think this really gets to the importance of prioritization, and maybe this is the impact effort matrix comes into play here. One of the things that we at MPP help a lot of organizations do is develop a stop doing list. So if your organization wants to pursue membership, but you just cannot see any time in your daily calendars in order to make that happen, I encourage you to do something that I first learned about from table stakes. I think it was the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. They would sit down and make a list of all the things that they could stop doing to make time to prioritize other things that they wanted to do. And so they might look at what are the things that they've been doing sort of on autopilot because they've always done that have had diminishing returns for the organization, or will have fewer returns than what they hope a new initiative will do. So that's something I'll make a note that we can include a list to the article about that in our Monday email. But the stop doing list is something I used all the time when I was the director of a 3-person local media startup. And it's something that we've helped a lot of organizations sit down and do before making a big push on membership, because you have to at least temporarily free up time so people have the headspace, as Maria mentioned, to like wrap their heads around these new problems that they're going to be working on. It's not just about time. It's about giving people the sort of mental space to think through stickier problems and the sort of rote performance of responsibilities that they might have had before. And Joellen mentions that collaborative stop doing lists are a wonderful internal motivator. Joellen, if you wanted to mention in the chat a way that the BDN has used collaborative stop doing lists, I would love to hear about that. Or if you have a link to an example of that, maybe share that in the chat. Next question is, how can I best start conversations with editorial who spend all their time writing editing articles to see the value of the long-term benefits of community efforts that we need them to provide and support? If I look at the retention impact, that will take a longer time to measure and see results. I do want to use the MVP approach to test new ideas only 1 to 2 times, and then we measure impact. Is that my best bet? So I think the question there, Kim, is it enough to put out an MVP and test it 1 to 2 times before you measure the results? I actually would encourage you to do a very simple retrospective after each iteration of the thing that you are trying. So with an MVP, what you do is you put out the thing that you're trying, you let it run for a specified period of time, and you should decide that period of time before so that you don't pull the plug early if it's not going well, or decide to sort of trick yourself into deciding to let it run longer. So identify the amount of time that you're going to let that MVP run, and at the end of that time, I would encourage you to assess the impact then. Doing a retrospective is really helpful for sitting back and figuring out what's working and what's not, and then using that information to sort of iterate on the MVP and put out a sort of new version of that into the world. It's not necessarily about the number of times. Again, this is why it's really valuable to identify a goal for each new thing that you try and to identify how you're going to measure whether you've reached that goal, because that's what's going to tell you when you can stop retroing it and iterating on it and putting a new thing out into the world is, have you reached the goal for the thing? If you have, then you can let it sit for a while. And you probably only need to revisit it when it is no longer reaching the goals that you've identified for it. And the other thing that I might say, it sounds like you're struggling to sort of navigate culture change within the organization. Rather than try to get the entire organization on board all at once, you might find the 1 to 2 people in the newsroom who are really excited about engaging with your community members and bringing that into their work. And the MVP could be doing this with that one person or with that one beat and working really steadily with them and sort of iterating with this 1 to 2 people and then trying to bring it out to the rest of the organization based on the data that you gather from doing it with this one person. It's easier to work with one really enthusiastic person or one really enthusiastic team and sort of collect receipts that the idea works and then try and convince the rest of the organization once you have a sort of proof of concept. Evan, if we have time at the end, I can do a bit of a debrief with the correspondent, but I think that that's a bit of a distraction from what we're trying to accomplish today. And there's been many, many articles and Twitter threads about what went wrong there. So we can talk a little bit about that at the end if we want to, but I mean, there's nothing shocking there. They were not very transparent about their decision making. People felt misled, and so they didn't renew their support. And I think that speaks to the importance of transparency in your goals and your decision making. But I think there's a million examples of organizations do this really well, and I don't know if it's super useful to dwell on this one particular example. Neiman Lab has done some great coverage of this. Evan's asking for links. I think if you head to the Neiman Lab homepage, they've got a couple stories out already about this. Shafiq, is it fine to start membership at first stage with those who are acquainted with your organization? I'm not positive I'm understanding this question completely, but the question is it fine to start membership at first stage with those who are acquainted with your organization? I think that's how most organizations approach starting their membership program. They start by appealing to their most loyal audience members, the people who are already reading their work, are already sort of aware of it. Those are the people that are going to be easiest to attract for membership in the first place. We have talked in the past a little bit about how to identify your loyal audience members. The most common ways to measure this are some benchmarks like people who visit your site 3 times or more in a month are considered to be loyal audience members. If you have a newsletter, people who open your newsletter 75% of the time or more. If you're using MailChimp, it's like the 4 or 5-star contact ratings. Those are some helpful benchmarks for loyal audience members, and those are the people that you might want to target your membership asks for first, because they're the ones who are going to be most likely to convert in the first place. And they can give you really valuable data for figuring out how you can make the membership program appealing to a broader swath of people who might not yet be loyal audience members. If that didn't answer the question, Shafiq, feel free to drop more questions in the chat. And last question that we will take, I think, at this stage is this one from Marcelo. What are some concrete ways to orient the newsroom, specifically reporters who use traditional newsroom, toward audience value without falling into accusations of chasing clicks or compromising journalistic integrity with the whims of the crowd? I think one of the great things about membership is it actually brings you down the exact opposite path of chasing clicks. Membership is a loyalty play. And that is not at all about getting as many people as possible to see your work. It's about serving your most loyal readers well, often, consistently, and deeply. So if you're getting accusations of chasing clicks, you might be sort of pursuing a different strategy than membership, because it would say that serving your members often pulls you away from that. But to that question of sort of compromising journalistic integrity with the whims of the crowd, this is something that I think it's really hard to convince people of until they begin to see it working. So I think the value there is beginning to choose a topic, a coverage area that you work on, and inviting some audience feedback on that coverage area. One of the ways that we see organizations do this most often or enter into it is sort of a service journalism approach. Many of you on this call probably did that with your coronavirus coverage or your election coverage. We saw a lot of organizations invite people to ask their questions about the pandemic, or tell the newsroom what issues they wanted the newsroom to focus on in its election coverage. Those are 2 really light-lift ways to begin showing the value of inviting audience contributions to the work. And I think, it's hard to say because I don't know your audience, but I would guess, based on the dozens of newsrooms that we've worked with around the world on this, that you'll be pleasantly surprised to find that people are, for the most part, encouraging you to do deeper, better journalism on topics that you're already often quite interested in. We really see very few examples of members trying to sort of co-opt the agenda of the newsroom to suit their own needs. And I think the important thing to say is your audience members or your members are not the final deciders. Same as when you interview people for an article, you choose what information from those interviews to include in the article. You even choose who you interview for that article. It's the same thing with feedback from your audience members. You don't have to act on every single thing that your audience members tell you to do. And I think it's really important in those meetings where people are worried about that to show, for example, some of the feedback that you got from audience members that would have been antithetical to your mission, and show that you did not follow that feedback. That is maybe one of the best ways to reassure people that you're not going to sort of go down that path of letting your audience members dictate the whole agenda. All right, I think that's the last question for this portion, which is great. We are right on time. The next thing that I wanted to very briefly mention, this is not the easiest thing to work through in a large classroom setting like this. So here I'm just going to offer you some sort of ways to think about doing this. And that is the importance of assessing your membership costs. So your membership program is, yes, an audience engagement effort, but it's also likely an effort to bring in more revenue for your organization, to make them sustainable. And so an important thing about this is not just develop revenue projections, but to also understand what costs are going to be sort of debited from your revenue. And so at MPP, what we tried to do is, when we spoke to newsrooms while working on the membership guide, we asked them to list for us all the sort of costs that they had to account for when they were running their membership program. And so there's sort of 2 types of costs at launch that you will want to do. And this is, having these buckets is really helpful when you're trying to develop a budget for your launch in particular. There are the startup costs. These are generally one-time costs that are associated with launching the membership effort. So this is like the initial cost of setting up your tech stack. If you feel like you need to hire a new person in order to support the program, that's the hiring of the new person. That's also going to maybe include things like launch merchandise, a branding effort around the membership program. So maybe bringing in a branding agency to help you, and maybe sort of paid marketing efforts around the launch of the program. But these are costs that will only come up once, and then will not be something you have to plan for going forward. The ongoing costs are things that are associated with keeping your program running. So that's going to be examples of things like the salaries of your membership support staff, the cost of membership merchandise and benefit fulfillment, some software costs like the sort of licensing fees for softwares that you might be using. So these are the costs that you will want to be accounting for in a monthly budget or a quarterly budget or something like that. And it's really important to be very granular as you're building a budget of accounting for these ongoing costs, because if you miss one of them, it can really wreak havoc on the revenue projections for the program, because these are not things that you can easily stop having to pay for as you develop the program further. And the ongoing costs can also be further broken down to help you sort of make sure that you're not forgetting anything. And on the next slide, we talk a little bit more about your staffing. So this is going to be salaries and benefits for your membership support team. You're going to want to ask questions like how many full-time employees are devoted to running the various components of the membership program. And if you're not going to have a full-time staff member, how are you accounting for sort of the portion of their time that is going to be spent on the membership program? Some of these questions might be sort of irrelevant for very tiny organizations who are not sort of doing budgeting across departments, but navigating that across departmental budget lines can also be kind of a sticking point for a lot of organizations. Technology and technical services costs, this is mostly the licenses that you're going to have to pay for to use things like a CRM or an email service provider, hosting fees, that kind of thing, just the licenses for using the tech stack that you set up for your membership program. And then there's sort of the direct programmatic costs. These are going to be things like member event management, merchandise, member-only content, whether that's like freelance content or just the amount of time that your reporters might be spending on doing something that's only for members, and the cost of sort of swag fulfillment and other sort of member benefit fulfillment. These are costs that are directly related with your membership fulfillment of your membership program. And another thing to think about is that of all the different types of costs that I just spoke about, these direct programmatic costs are often the ones that are most flexible. So if you're having trouble swallowing the cost of the membership program as you set it up, and you're trying to look for places where you can sort of trim costs a little bit, I would say the place to start is looking at the direct programmatic costs. Can you find sponsors to cover the cost of your events, for example? Or could you downscale your event strategy for a couple months to sort of rebalance the budget? Could you decrease the cost of the swag that you might be offering? This is the area where you will likely find the most flexibility in your budget. So if you have to trim costs for a little while, this is where we say that you might want to start doing that first. It's also the easiest thing to ramp back up when you might be on a more sort of stable financial footing. That's it for costs. I know that's pretty brief, but this is a hard thing to sort of get too much into specifics with. But I encourage you to maybe go to the section of the membership guide where we break that down further and build out your own sort of budgeting sheet to make sure that you're checking for all of the costs that are going to come up with your program, either if it's already running, all the costs that you presently have, or if you're preparing to launch, making sure that you've budgeted for everything that could come up there. And the next thing, this is probably everyone's least favorite thing to think about. It is often the most frustrating part of running a membership program. We've heard organizations joke that they need therapy sessions after setting up their tech stack for their membership program. So I just say that to say that I understand how frustrating this is. And our goal with this part of the presentation is to sort of demystify the process a little bit and hopefully help you figure out what to prioritize and when it's worthwhile to bring in outside help for your organization. The membership tech stack has these 9 different components at its sort of largest size. So your organization might not have all 9 of these things at the beginning. It might not ever reach all 9 of these things, but you're obviously going to have a CMS. You're going to likely have an email service provider, a customer relationship management software. You're going to probably have some sort of social media management. You're going to need a payment processor. You're going to want to have some capacity to sort of understand how your audience interacts with your journalism through an analytics software. You might have a registration wall or a paywall, depending on how your organization is structured. There's an increasing number of sort of all-in-one platforms that bring many of these together. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then also organizations are increasingly employing sort of listening tools and services, commenting platforms. That's going to be things like Hearken and subtext and even Facebook groups, Slack workspaces, all the places that you set up to sort of listen and sort of be in community with your members more aggressively. In the tech stack section of the membership guide, Yossi did a fantastic job going into all 9 of these. What are the features that you have to have? What are the features that are nice to have? And some examples of organizations that or companies that do each of these things. So I'm going to only focus on a couple of these in the presentation, but you can find more on all of this in the tech stack section of the membership guide. The first thing that I'll talk about is the CRM. The CRM is it's the centralized database that enables you to keep track of all the ways that your audience interacts with your brand. It is the single source of truth for all of your contacts. It's where you're storing their email address, their phone number, especially if you have a sort of SMS strategy, how long they've been a member, their payment information. This is their renewal information, maybe what newsletters they're signed up to. This is where this should be the hub for all of the information that you have about your members. And you should really devote time and energy to making sure that this becomes that place that contains all of the information that you need to have about your members. If your member data, like their email subscription preferences and their payment information and their email addresses are in 3 different places, you are going to struggle to fulfill any of the things that you have said that you will offer to your audience members. So I really encourage you to invest in making sure that the CRM is set up properly. It's the sort of most crucial component of any member-driven organization is having a CRM that meets their needs. Your email service provider is probably one that you're all very aware of. This is what enables you to design and send emails to list segments and groups. It's the most common way at this point in time for organizations to develop a loyal audience and market their membership program. It's incredibly important that your ESP is synced with your CRM for that point that I made above, where you can see both their payment status and their maybe newsletter subscription preferences and newsletter reading activity in one place. So these are sort of 2 of the most critical components for most member-driven newsrooms. If you're not a sort of text-based organization, an ESP might be less essential. Podcasting organizations are beginning to experiment with new ways of reaching their audience members. SMS is becoming increasingly important. But at this point in time, an ESP remains sort of the most common and significant way that people are reaching their members and appealing to them to become members, appealing to their audience members to become members. The next thing that you'll need if you are pursuing membership as a revenue strategy is a payment processor. This is pretty straightforward. It enables you to accept and refund payments for readers for their products, including membership. Really important is that your payment processor offers a user experience that is really easy for your members. It is so easy to lose people at the payment page if they encounter any friction putting down their credit card and paying for membership. So you'll want to really test this out. Maybe even ask, if you have a good relationship with some of your members, ask them to test out a payment processor for you before you roll it out to the world, and make sure they find it really intuitive and easy to get through. And you'll also want to think really carefully and pay close attention to the fees that each of these payment processors charge, especially because those costs can sometimes go up as your membership program gets larger. And as you're accounting for the costs of running your membership program, you'll want to think about how the cost of each of the parts of your tech stack, how those costs grow as your membership program goes. But this can be particularly important with a payment processor where the fees can often mount really quickly. It's also really difficult to switch payment processors midway through your membership program because of all the data that is contained in that system. And we've seen a number of organizations, and we talk about this a little bit more in the membership guide, find out that they can't afford the cost of the payment processor they chose at launch, and then have to figure out a way to migrate all of those people who joined through that previous payment processor, figure out how to migrate them all to a new payment processor. And that's a really huge headache for you and for the members. So try to sort of think forward 1 year, 2 years, 3 years forward in your membership program, and try to make decisions that will also work for you 3 years down the line. And the last thing is analytics. This is something that probably most of you spend quite a bit of time in Google Analytics or something similar. Analytics enable you to keep track of the user behavior across the site and see in real time where your audience is coming from and what they'll do next. You're going to want this for both your website and likely also your social media channels. And this is really helpful in regards to membership, particularly because you can see what types of coverage you do are best read where you have most loyal audience members. So you can get really granular in your analytics software and understand what types of journalism you do are most attractive, bring back the most repeat visitors. That begins to tell you maybe what kind of content is most valuable to potential members. And that is how analytics software can really help you be more targeted in your membership ask at launch. Next thing is, and many of you are likely working with these companies, are the rise of all-in-one services. So they will often sort of knit together several of the components that I just mentioned, including an ESP, CRM, and payment processor. And another particular set of questions to consider with these is they can be really, really handy, and they can really help address some of the resource issues that you have in your newsroom. But you'll want to make sure that this will work just as well when you have a significant number of members. If you're trying to make some comparisons, you want to think about the fees for these all-in-one services can seem quite high in the beginning, but if you think about what are the fees associated with each component of this, if you're administering them individually, you might still find that the all-in-one service is more useful. And you also want to include like the wraparound services that are included. Places like News Revenue Hub also give a significant amount of marketing advice to organizations that are in that community. Pico offers a lot of advice in sort of newsletter optimization and things like that. And so you might want to ask, in addition to actually servicing us on the tech side, what other types of sort of consulting services do you offer to your clients? Because you can also sort of begin to understand the value of those against the fees that they charge. Some examples of these all-in-one services are News Revenue Hub, Pico, Steady, Memberful, and Ghost. And I will mention that we will share in the email on Monday, or it looks like somebody is dropping it in right now, maybe. Pointer and News Catalyst very recently did a sort of review of the 5 or 6 most common sort of member support packages out there. It includes the ones that I mentioned here on the slide. And also Yossi and others on the LendFest team put together a really great pricing guide for some of the vendors most commonly used in the media industry to do some of the things that I just spoke about. And you'll find links to all of that in the tech stack section of the membership guide. And that pricing template that Yossi put together is really useful for decoding something that vendors can sometimes make it very difficult to figure out. And that is how the cost will rise as your use of the software grows with the growth of your membership program. And the next question, or the next thing that we get a lot is, I don't like what's on the market. Should I build my own thing? And the answer is almost all the time, almost certainly not. There are trade-offs to buying versus building, and it's quite likely that none of these off-the-shelf technologies that I just mentioned will meet your every need. But what you have to give up in flexibility can save you an immense amount of time. And I'm just going to invite Rodney to share his thoughts on this, because he knows a lot more than I do about the headaches of building your own thing. And we can learn from their experience.
Thanks. The highlight is, I think increasingly there's so many options out there that are proven and good and well documented and affordable, that, you know, to go down the path of building your own, you know, it's kind of like, do I buy a car that I can read reviews on and I know what kind of mileage I'm going to get, I know how to work, or do I build my own car? Maybe I could build my own car, but is it going to be safe? Is it going to work? Is it going to get me from A to B? Probably not, and it's going to be really expensive. So that's the short of it. At the Tribune, when I started there about a decade ago, the Tribune had built its own CMS. It had largely built its own CRM. It had built its own email system, RSVP system, all the stuff. And it took us years to get out of that. We got into it pretty fast in a couple of years, but it took probably 6 years to get out of it. We still have our own homegrown CMS, but now we use Salesforce for CRM, which is a great option if it's a good fit for you. I wouldn't recommend it for a small operation if it's a really tiny group. But in general, you know, I think there's a lot out there, and the guide lists many options, and increasingly there's more out there. That there's a lot of off-the-shelf stuff you can do. It doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to be no work, no customization, but just it's a really hazardous path to go down if you're not backed by Jeff Bezos to decide I'm going to build my own system. I would strongly recommend against it unless money is no object to you.
And actually, there's another question for you in the chat, Rodney. What ESP does the Tribune use? What SMS tech does it use, if any? we've had trouble integrating SMS with our MailChimp audience.
Sure. The Tribune, we use MailChimp. And if you're familiar with the News Revenue Hub, their whole system and our system are largely the same. And that's not coincidental. Before News Revenue Hub was News Revenue Hub, when it was at Voice of San Diego, we, the Texas Tribune, Voice of San Diego, and MinnPost, created the checkout system that we've all evolved from since then, but it's basically the same. It's Stripe and Salesforce and MailChimp. So I think MailChimp is another one where my feeling is like, it gets you probably, for us, 85, 90% of what we want out of it. It's not 100% perfect, but for the reliability, the pricing, the community support is very large. It's huge. We used MailChimp, started maybe 6 or 7 years ago when our newsletter business and our membership business was a lot smaller, and it's been able to grow with us. So for SMS, we have not integrated SMS with our CRM. The SMS stuff we've done has been more project-based. We've used Ground Source for some investigative work. We've done some outreach here and there, but we don't have a consistent SMS strategy. So I don't have a good recommendation on that.
And I'll say that this is something earlier today, Yossi and I and the rest of the research team on the membership guide got together to talk about what updates we'd be making to the membership guide next. And we will be looking into whether there are organizations who have employed SMS in service of their members, have figured out ways to market their membership program over SMS, or have developed SMS as sort of a benefit to the membership program to deepen that relationship. So Marcelo, maybe we'll have more on that in the membership guide in the coming months, but SMS is a relatively new strategy still. And so there aren't yet that many sort of like proven cases of it working, it hasn't yet necessarily got to the size of an audience that organizations are investing the time in figuring out how to integrate it with something like MailChimp or Salesforce yet. So usually these new technologies have to reach a certain level of use and sort of proven capacity to work before people will invest in the challenge of integrating it into a CRM and whatnot. So I'll just mention that. I'm going to go through a couple more things, and then we'll have a pretty hefty question break for the end of this class, because the other questions are not specific to the Tribune. So one case study that I wanted to highlight, in addition to Rodney's advice based on the Tribune's experience with sort of setting up their tech staff, is a case study that we have from the membership guide. Many of you might be aware of the Dispatch, which is a conservative news startup that launched in 2019. And we wrote a case study about their tech stack decisions because we found it to be a really great example of having an incredible clarity of what is most important for your organization, even if that looks quite different from what is the most important priority for other organizations out there. So when the Dispatch launched, they identified that they would be publishing almost exclusively through email newsletters and podcasts. And they needed a publishing platform that would support both of those content types and make it very easy for them to process member payments for both of those content types. And they wanted to do it very cost efficiently because they wanted to make sure that their runway could last a pretty generous amount of time because they didn't know how their membership drive was going to go. And so what the Dispatch sat back and did is they looked at all the options on the market and they realized it's actually not that important for us to have a really built out website at this stage. We're going to be publishing almost exclusively through our newsletter and podcast. So why do we need to invest in having our own CMS? Why do we need to invest in building out our own site at this stage? And so they turned to Substack, which many of you are aware of at this point, and they worked with the team there to make a few tiny tweaks to make Substack work for them, a full-fledged news organization. And if I remember correctly, and Yossi, correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, but they're the first sort of like news organization rather than individual that use Substack as their publishing platform. And they had to give up a number of things such as a personalized landing page in order to work with Substack, but it decreased significantly the amount of time that anyone on their team would have to spend on technological challenges. And it freed that team to focus its resources almost exclusively on providing differentiated content and providing a good member experience. And so we bring that up because the Dispatch had to make the tough call of basically not having a website, but that was a worthwhile trade-off for them to make because Substack was able to offer a pretty seamless payment experience and provide a really strong newsletter experience for their readers, which was going to be the core of sort of members' experience with the Dispatch. The last thing that I will talk about today is the pre-launch checklist. So one of the things, we have a lot more on this in the membership guide, but many of you might be getting ready for launch, or maybe you already have launched, but you worry that you maybe missed a couple things to get ready before launch. So one of the things that we created in the membership guide is a sort of a launch checklist. And we created the launch checklist based on interviews with a couple dozen organizations, and answer to the question of, what did you have ready for launch, and what do you wish you had ready for launch? And so we learned a lot from the mistakes that these organizations made of not having certain things in place. And so there's sort of 5 components to a strong launch, and we go into a lot more detail on these in the membership guide. But the first is getting the timing right. This can be difficult because the news cycle shifts so much, but you should sit down with your calendar, look at what else might be happening in your organization and outside your organization before you set a launch date in stone. And you should also sit back and think, like, what is our launch campaign going to look like? How long is it going to last? Are we going to be pushing this for just 1 week? Are we going to be pushing this for 3 weeks? And make sure that you look at your internal calendar and clear up time within your staff to devote their resources to the membership campaign launch, and make sure people are actually going to have the capacity at the time that you launch to support it. Another thing is to make sure that you're ready to tell your story really aggressively and really well. The launch of your membership program is an unparalleled moment to communicate the value of what your newsroom does to the community, and you don't want to squander that opportunity. You also don't want to get it wrong. So this is a moment to sit back and be like, what story do you want to tell with our membership launch? What are the things about our work that make us uniquely important to this ecosystem, and how do we want to tell those in such a way that people understand how supporting us can continue to support that work? So really invest time in thinking about how you're going to tell your membership story. You'll also want to make sure that you've got a customer service plan in place. That basically entails handling the problems that your members and potential members will encounter as they try to join your membership program. So we recommend setting up customer service protocols proactively, anticipate the types of challenges and questions that might come up, and make sure that you have an FAQ out there. Make sure that you've got somebody on hand to answer those questions as promptly as possible, especially in the beginning. You want to make sure that nobody waits more than a couple hours, ideally no more than an hour, to have a response to their email about the challenge that they might be having signing up. A lot of organizations put together sort of an if this, then that protocol. So if a member writes in saying that their credit card is getting rejected, then the sales administrator will receive that request, and they will get them on the phone to walk them through the challenges. So sort of like the if is the different situations that come up, and the then is how you're going to address that situation. Most importantly, who is going to address that situation that comes up. Technical issues are unfortunately almost inevitable at launch, but you can minimize them by thinking ahead about what could go wrong and doing really aggressive testing of your tools and your checkout flow ahead of the launch. If you feel comfortable, you could even invite some of your potential members to try it out and make sure that it makes sense to them. And we have some examples of the things that you're going to want to check and make sure they work in the checklist that's available in the membership guide. And the last thing is to put good habits in place that can set you up for success at both growth and retention going forward. So you're going to want to make sure that you have a plan for onboarding your members. That means having an onboarding series set up, and maybe also thinking about what kind of information you want to get from your members upon launch that you can collect in the onboarding series. You're going to want to have a system in place for understanding where your members are coming from and maybe what types of membership appeals most appeal to them. We have some advice on sort of how to set up a tracking system for that in the launching section of the membership guide. But your launch moment is this really heightened moment when you can collect a lot of data in a very rapid clip in a very short period of time. And so you want to set yourself up to be ready to ingest that. So you're going to want to track the conversion rate across each of the membership appeals that you run. And you're going to want to study what message was in that membership appeal. Why do we think that message performed so well? Or why do we think that message performed so poorly? Gathering this data systematically can help you design better membership appeals going forward, figure out what types of content you might want to put your membership appeals on, and that kind of thing. And so you don't want to squander this opportunity to gather some really useful data for making better decisions down the line as well. I think that is pretty much it. I think there was, what's up next? So we still have one set of office hours left. That will be this Tuesday, December 15th from 2 to 2:30 p.m. The link to sign up for that will go out in the Monday email. That Monday email will also include a sort of masterclass resource list. So all of these resources that we have been sharing, every week in the email. Thank you, Yossi, dropped the Calendly link in there already. The resource list will sort of wrap up everything that we have shared in previous newsletters and put it in one document that you can sort of save to your drive and share with the rest of your team. We will also be sending out a course survey. And Yossi, do you want to chime in on any of these other points here on the slide?
Yes, I am the voice from beyond. Feel free to join us at future events. We have a workshop for the News Philanthropy Network next Thursday, December 17th, on setting goals for fundraising. I will drop a link into the chat for the registration for that. It's free. Feel free to invite any of your colleagues. And we'll have much more with Membership 201 and other topics coming in the new year. So you are all already on our list, so you will hear from me about all of that. But thank you so much for joining us for this experiment of this course, and we hope it was helpful. And please do take the survey when we send it out on Monday. It will help us continue to evolve and make these courses better for you and others moving forward.
And we've got plenty of time left for questions today. We wanted to make sure that we ended with time to answer them. So I'll just jump to the last slide, which also has my email address and my office hours going forward. But I'll address some of the questions. It looks like Yossi already answered April's questions about good recommendations for a CRM. It's difficult for me to recommend a specific one for your organization. And so we won't do that because I don't know the specifics, but Yossi linked there to, or Rodney linked there to a list of things to consider as you're choosing a CRM. And one of the other things that we address in the membership guide is how to decide when you might want to hire outside help to get your tech stack set up right. There are a number of consultants in the journalism industry who specialize in helping organizations implement new software. And this, especially if you are skeptical of your ability to troubleshoot any challenges that might come up in the future, it is really helpful to bring in somebody for that crucial stage, because if you don't have it set up right from the beginning, you can lose tons of time, and you can also lose members over the challenges of getting your tech stack set up correctly. So especially with the CRM, it can be really helpful to make sure that you have some outside help for that. Question for Mariam is, any systems that work well or are recommended for international membership organizations? Mariam, two that I know that have sort of focused on serving the international market, but I don't know if they're thinking specifically about any challenges that might come up in Pakistan, is Steady, which is based in Germany, but is set up to work across many different currencies already. And they have been doing some work in Asia already, as I understand. The other that seems to have a very international lens and be thinking about working across borders is Ghost, which very recently rolled out a sort of subscription and membership payment platform. So those are two that I might recommend, in that they've just been thinking a lot about the utility of all of this. Any other questions? You can bring up any questions about any part of the course at this stage. Maria, I'm happy to answer some questions about the correspondent, but I would like to have a more specific question than commenting on the closing. I'm not part of the team, and I don't have a whole lot of insight into the internal decision. So if you have a specific question about that, I'd be happy to answer it as best I can, with the caveat that I know nothing more than what all of you have seen in the media coverage of it. So if someone has a specific question, I'm happy to answer it. But you can drop it in the chat if you would like. No more questions, really? Every other time we haven't had enough time to handle all the questions, and today we've got all this time.
Why don't we give people a moment if they have more to ask? Let's give a plug for, we are planning a follow-on course next year, in the early part of the year, called Membership 201. And so for those of you that have graduated your 101, you have that prerequisite out of the way, or we're not going to check your credentials, but hopefully we can twist Ariel's arm to come back and share her wisdom. And you want to highlight, just like, I know you don't have to detail where it's doing, but like what would that be different, Ariel, from what we just finished today?
Yeah, so Membership 201 will get into things like retention best practices, how to troubleshoot retention challenges that you might be having. We'll get into how to develop a membership marketing campaign. We will talk about probably some of the points around like adopting a product mindset in your newsroom to make sort of quicker audience-centric decisions. And I think we'll also, given how positively people seem to respond to the sort of live case studies that we did, I think we'll also bring up more case studies in the next class, examples of organizations that have really sort of leveled up something about their membership effort, and bring them in so that they can present on that work and answer questions around it. So it'll be sort of more into the mechanics of membership and the day-to-day operations, whereas this course was really focused on helping you build a foundation and helping you understand, like sort of introducing some frameworks that could help you make these decisions more easily. The 201 level will get more into like execution of a lot of this work. And this will be actually another plug for the survey, is the survey will also help inform our design of Membership 201. So if there are things that you feel like should have been addressed here, or you anticipate having questions around in a couple of months, would love if you noted that in the survey. What would a 201 level course, what would make it really useful for you? Looks like we've got a couple questions coming in. Kim wants to know where my cool background of plants is. I am in my hometown of Miami right now, and so this is not a fake background. This is actually what the backyard in this place that we have been staying for a little while is. It's a really nice thing to look at on the screen when I'm staring at a screen all day. Mariam's question is, what's been the most popular swag or merchandise that people have been interested in getting? It's a good question. I don't actually have the answer to that. I don't know if there are people in the chat who offer swag and have seen tremendous returns on that swag. I don't know if, Rodney, there's any Tribune swag that people have really loved. Swag is often not as impactful as organizations often anticipate it being.
Yeah, we at the Tribune, market of one, but we haven't done a ton. We've done a few campaigns with baseball caps and T-shirts, but it's a challenge. I've been on a couple public radio station boards, and it's it is very common for public media to do that. Part of it is I think they built up the infrastructure, and the people are kind of trained for that transaction of I give $50 and I get the travel mug or I get the tote bag. Perhaps the Current, which is the public media trade journal. You might check there. I don't know. There must have been studies about which swag works better than others.
I think one of the things that we've seen is we have seen organizations have a lot of success with swag that ties into sort of like a community moment. I think we linked to this in the membership guide section on swag, but and Yossi is the one I think who first told me about it, so maybe he'll have more to say. But I think it was Minnesota Public Radio who there was this incredible story of like a raccoon that was climbing the building across their offices, and they live tweeted this raccoon's journey, and like the whole city got invested in this raccoon's journey, and they realized that they had like created this citywide sort of community moment, and they spun up some sort of like time limited swag around sort of the raccoon that could. I will solution set. Yes. Oh yeah. Guys, hey, Yossi wrote a case study about it. He just dropped it in there. And so swag can be particularly effective when it taps into an emotion or a sort of like point of connection. So in that case, there was this moment that everybody got really invested in. It was sort of the swag became a way to say like, I was there for this moment. And so you might think about how you can develop swag that sort of taps into a moment in time. An unconventional example that we wrote about in the membership guide is something that VT Digger did when they were running their spring membership drive. They felt really uncomfortable about offering their benefits as usual in the moment of a community crisis. They were running their membership drive last spring, just as the coronavirus pandemic was really hitting the United States. And so what they did instead is they worked with a company that was making cloth masks locally. And for every person who joined during that campaign, one mask was donated to a local essential worker at a local medical facility. And so that's a very unconventional approach to swag, but I really love that because they connected supporting VT Digger with helping the community as a whole sort of get through the pandemic. So you might think about how you can also frame your swag as something that benefits not just your organization, but other entities in the community. And we have a case study on that that you can find if you look up VT Digger in the case study section of the membership guide.
Following up on the raccoon, interestingly, one of the things that they said is there were two particular interesting use cases. One, existing members sort of upped their membership because they wanted the t-shirt, and it also attracted a bunch of first-time donors, many from out of state. And so this was summer 2018, and I tried to follow up with them summer 2019 to see how many folks actually retained, and didn't hear back, which leads me to believe that there wasn't huge retention, but still definitely worthwhile to take advantage of those viral moments.
Thank you, Charlotte Ann, for bringing that up. I'm glad that we've got more detail on there. And thank you, Yossi, for that. The last question that I see here is from Michelle. We're a small organization launched last year. We need to work on our budget, but I'm wondering what a good benchmark is for loyal readers. We're at 150 and we publish 4 to 8 times a month. I would say rather than the sheer number of readers, you want to make sure that you have a meaningful percentage of your readers are loyal. So I might, benchmarks that we've seen is you can expect to convert 10% of a newsletter list into members. So you might want to look less so for the sheer number of people and more look at is enough of our existing readers loyal that this is worth doing. And so that 10% benchmark is quite commonly used, 75% of your newsletter readers. So you might want to wait to launch until you see a meaningful percentage of people hitting that benchmark for loyalty, whether that's the 3 times a month site visitors or 75% of your readers opening the percentage of readers opening your newsletter 75% of the time. Sorry, I've said that statistic so many times today, I'm jumbling it in my head. And as Rodney mentioned, 10% is the magic number of public radio listeners. So yes, we see at MPP a whole lot. 90% of the people that come to your site will never contribute much of anything. 10% of the people will contribute through membership, and then 1% of people will be sort of the super users who are giving a significant amount of money each year, or giving money and then participating in sort of memberful ways, coming to events, contributing to your journalism, connecting you with partners. And so that's really, I think, a helpful benchmark for setting realistic expectations. You're not failing if you're not getting like half of your readers to become members. That actually puts you in line with the majority of the people who are making this work for them. And any more questions? Oh, I think we've answered all of them.
And remind one more time, we do have one more office hour session on Tuesday. Yossi dropped the link in, and that's it's relatively intimate. You know, a few people show up each week, so it's a good chance to dig in deeper. If you have a question or there's something you don't want to bring up here in the chat with everybody, so please take advantage of it. You know, it's free.
Yeah.
It's good.
Or if you just want to hang out with us,
yeah.
Yeah, you're also welcome to join the office hours if you don't have specific questions, but you want to hear a sort of workshop of somebody else's membership challenges in case they dovetail with yours. We have seen people stay for the entirety of the time, even after their questions have been asked. If you just want to be a fly on the wall and you don't have a specific question, but want to listen to other folks' challenges, you'd be welcome to join for that reason too.
There's some camaraderie in realizing you're not alone. There's others in the same boat.
And please, please, please fill out the survey next week. It'll really help us to figure out what parts of this course were most impactful, what areas we could improve upon, what membership 201 should include to be truly useful. If we do another membership 101, what should maybe change about that next time? So it would be so helpful for us if you took a few minutes to answer that on Monday. And it's, as Bea mentioned, happy holidays to everybody, whatever you are celebrating. I hope all of you get a chance for some much needed rest this holiday season, whether you're in the US and just went through the election and the pandemic, or you're outside the US and you've just been trying to get through the pandemic. I think everybody deserves some rest this holiday season, and I hope that all of you get that.
Right.
Thank you so much for all the questions.
Yes, thank you. All right, I think we're at time. So let's call it a show. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
And big email on Monday with lots of links and resources. Bye.
Bye.